My name is Trevor Langford. I am 39 years old, and in 2021 I was living in a mid-sized apartment complex in Fort Wayne, Indiana. At the time, I was working as a logistics coordinator for a regional distribution company. My schedule was consistent. I left for work at 7:15 every morning and usually returned home around 6 o'clock in the evening. I lived alone on the third floor of a courtyard-style building. The structure was shaped like a wide rectangle, with balconies facing inward toward a shared parking lot. From my kitchen window and small balcony, I had a direct view of the unit across from mine, apartment 3F. When I first moved in, 3F appeared vacant. The blinds were closed at all times. The balcony was empty. No welcome mat outside the door. I didn't think much of it. Units turned over frequently in that building. About 2 weeks after I moved in, I noticed a lamp turn on inside 3F at exactly 9 p.m. I remember the time because I was rinsing dishes and glanced up at the microwave clock. The light inside the apartment switched on abruptly, glowing warm yellow through the blinds. It stayed on for 2 hours and turned off at exactly 11 p.m. The next night the same thing happened. 9 p.m. on, 11 p.m. off. It continued every night after that. At first, I assumed someone had moved in and simply kept a strict routine. The building was quiet overall. People mostly kept to themselves. I never saw anyone entering or leaving 3F, but that didn't necessarily mean much. Our work schedules could have been opposite. After about 3 weeks of noticing the same timing, I started paying closer attention. The blinds in 3F never shifted. Not slightly. Not unevenly. There was no silhouette moving behind them when the light turned on. It was just illumination filling the space behind closed slats. I stepped onto my balcony one evening at 8:58 p.m. and waited. At 9 o'clock exactly, the lamp switched on. There was no gradual brightening. It was immediate. I stayed outside for 15 minutes. No movement inside. No shadows crossing the blinds. The parking spot directly below 3F was rarely occupied. Sometimes a car would park there overnight, but never consistently. I began to wonder how the tenant came and went without being seen. About a month into this pattern, I stopped by the leasing office. I asked casually if someone lived in 3F. The property manager checked her computer and confirmed it was occupied by a man in his mid-40s who worked remotely. She said he preferred privacy and had lived there for several months before I moved in. That explanation was reasonable. Still, over the next few weeks, the pattern did not change. 9 p.m. on, 11 p.m. off. Every single day. I started keeping notes in a small notebook out of curiosity. I wrote down the time each evening. There were no deviations. Even on weekends. Even during storms. One Saturday afternoon around 2 p.m., I decided to knock on his door. I walked across the courtyard, climbed the stairs, and stood outside 3F. I knocked twice. There was no answer. I waited. I did not hear footsteps inside. No television. No voices. I knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. That night at 9 p.m., the lamp came on as usual. Around mid-September, something shifted slightly. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. one night to get water. As I passed the kitchen window, I noticed light coming from 3F. The lamp was on. That had never happened before. I stood there in the dark and watched for nearly 20 minutes. The light remained steady. No movement behind the blinds. Then, without flickering, it turned off. The following evening, the regular 9 p.m. schedule resumed. After that incident, small irregularities began. Sometimes the light would flicker once before stabilizing. Once or twice it seemed slightly dimmer than usual, but still turned off at exactly 11 p.m. Then came the power outage. A heavy thunderstorm moved through the area in early October. Around 8:40 p.m. the entire complex lost power. My apartment went dark. The hallway emergency lights activated on battery backup. The courtyard fell into near total darkness. Except for 3F. At 9 p.m. the lamp inside 3F turned on. It glowed steadily while the rest of the building remained without electricity. I stepped onto my balcony and looked across. The blinds were closed as always. The light shone through clearly. No generator noise was audible. No extension cords. Just steady illumination. The complex power returned around 10:15 p.m. My own lights flickered back on. At 11 p.m., as if nothing unusual had happened, the lamp in 3F turned off. That was the first time I felt something close to unease rather than curiosity. 2 mornings later, I left for work earlier than usual, around 5:45 a.m. The sky was still dark blue before sunrise. As I stepped onto my balcony to check the weather, I noticed something different across the courtyard. The blinds in 3F were open. Wide open. I had never seen them open before. The interior of the apartment was clearly visible in the early dawn light. It was empty. There was no furniture, no lamp, no couch, no table. The carpet looked bare. The walls were plain. The room was completely vacant. I stood there for several seconds trying to process it. There was no sign that anyone had been living there recently. That afternoon, I went to the leasing office again. I asked directly whether 3F was occupied. The property manager checked her records and frowned. She told me the unit had been vacant for over 6 months. The previous tenant had moved out before my lease began. I explained that I had been seeing a lamp turn on inside every night at 9 p.m. She insisted there were no active utilities assigned to that unit. Electricity had been shut off when the last tenant left. Maintenance later confirmed that the breaker panel inside 3F was switched off. I moved out 3 weeks later when my lease allowed it. I did not experience anything else unusual before leaving, but I also stopped looking across the courtyard after that morning. I cannot explain what I was seeing. I know the timing was consistent. I know the light continued during a building-wide outage. And I know the apartment appeared completely empty when the blinds were finally open. I have lived in 2 different apartment complexes since then. Neither has given me reason to pay attention to the windows across from mine. But I still find myself checking the time around 9 p.m., almost out of habit. For months, that light turned on every night. And according to management, there was no one there to turn it on at all.